Hi, my name is Linda Abraham, and I am the president of Accepted and the moderator for today's webinar. I want to welcome all of you to Get Accepted to Medical School in 2019, and that will be presented by Alicia McNease Nimonkar. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping items for you. Alicia is going to ask several questions during the presentation, and ask you to either to raise your hands and reply. I'd like you to raise your hands now. That means clicking on the hand icon underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. Please raise your hand or click on that icon when you find it. Raising hands allows you to respond to our questions. What about your questions? We have a lot of time during and at the end of Alicia's presentation for questions, and we'll answer them then. If you have general questions and we run out of time before answering them today, you can post it on accepted.com/medschool2019. We're going to announce a special discount today for webinar registration, but rather than have you anxiously waiting to find out what that is, I'm going to actually share it with you right now, just to give yourself a gift. We're giving you a gift, $250 off any of Accepted's very popular primary application packages. Coupon code is SAVE250. And you can find that at accepted.com/primary. We'll give this information to you again at the end. But again, I've been told that sometimes people are very anxious about what the offer is. And we do have one today. We don't always have one, but we do have one today. And I don't want anybody to be sitting here nervously wondering what that is. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Alicia McNease Nimonkar, who will present Get Accepted to Medical School 2019. Alicia started advising Accepted clients in 2012. She immediately was earning rave reviews from her clients. Prior to joining Accepted, she both evaluated applications and advised med school applicants as director of the UC Davis Postbac program. She brings enormous insight and experience with the medical school application process to our webinar today. Without further ado, Alicia McNease Nimonkar and Get Accepted to Medical School in 2019.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to start by asking a question. How many people have applied to medical school? So for those of you listening, how many of you applied to medical school? If you could please give us a show of hands.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay, a lot of those hands are going up. So we have not that many actually, about 15% have applied to medical school previously.
Cool, great, okay. So another question, for those of you who have applied that 15%, what part of the application process did you have the most difficulty completing? And you should see a poll pop up on your screen. So A, AMCAS application, B, letters of recommendation, C, secondary applications, or D, interviews.
Okay. And we have a strong leader here. Okay, we are getting actually apparently a little bit higher percentage at this point did reapply because we're getting a higher percentage voting. I'm going to count down from 5 and then close the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now we have 25% having voted, and here are the results. So it's 81% said the MCAS application was the most difficult part. Nobody found the letters of recommendation particularly taxing. 6% said the secondary applications, and 13% said the interviews. And that was actually, it's now 28% having voted.
Interesting, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. This helps me to customize the webinar to you. So we will spend a significant amount of time on the AMCAS application and strategies. So after you take the MCAT, the first stop on your journey to medical school is the primary application, as those of you who have applied before know. So the MCAS application can be submitted as early as June 1st or as late as early November. The application opens in May, so you can begin filling it out, but you cannot submit it until the beginning of June. The earlier you apply, the better, because admissions is done on a rolling admissions basis. So first come, first served. So if they interview, if they send out secondary applications, interview, and offer all the spots that they have available before they get your application, if you apply late, they may not even read it. So the sooner the better. The application itself, the primary, contains a personal statement, which is 5,300 characters, a statement of disadvantage, which is 1,325 characters. So the personal statement's about a page and a half, and the statement of disadvantage, if that applies to you, is about a paragraph. The 15 activity descriptions, you can include a maximum of 15, and you really don't want to apply with less. It can really hurt you to apply with less than 15. And each of those activity descriptions are 700 characters, so a short paragraph. And then you get to select 3 of those 15 as being the most meaningful. And when you'll have 2 essays to complete. You'll have a description, and you'll have a 1,325 character essay to explain why it was so meaningful. So the strategy I recommend on the primary application is it's important to submit your best work. So you absolutely want to start early. You can start as early as May to fill out the application, but to work on these application materials starting as soon as possible in the spring can help you, give you the time to do multiple drafts, enjoy the process, and to get things submitted as early as possible in polished work. School selection. Well, I recommend applying anywhere from 20 to 25. So 20 is a safe number, especially if you're strategic in how you choose the schools. So if applicable, you can apply for the FAP, the Fee Assistance Program. This includes a reduced fee for the MCAT exam if you haven't already taken it. It goes from the normal cost to take the MCAT is $315, and it goes to $125 if you receive the FAP. So that's a huge discount. You get to apply to 16 schools for free. The application fee is completely waived, and the secondary application fees are also waived for those 16 schools. And often if you let the schools that you apply to know beyond the 16 that you're applying with the FAP, other schools will also waive the secondary fee. So it's a great thing to do if you're eligible. And their website is still accepting applications, so the program, they're still looking for people to give the FAP to. So apply if you think that you would fit the criteria. To choose schools, evaluate your stats and compare to medical schools you would like to attend. So as long as your numbers fit firmly in either the NCAT category or the GPA category, right, you can consider that school. I don't recommend applying too many dream schools. If your numbers are way out of their ranges, don't apply. But if at least one of your numbers fits their range, or best, if both fit, that becomes a safety school. That's a safe school for you to apply to. So I recommend applying to as many safety schools as you can. In a few schools that you fit within one of those ranges, and really limit the number of dream schools where you don't fit into either range. I mean, I'd consider whether you should apply to the schools at all. But if it's a dream school, it's a dream school. Attending pre-med conferences to network with other students, medical students and medical school outreach officers. So making sure that you are talking to current or former students to get an idea of what the school's actually like. And the best advice I can possibly give you today, and I hope it's something that you'll actually do, is to visit the medical school campuses. Now is a fantastic time because you're able to do it if you visit the schools in your state. When you've submitted your application, you're going to be so overwhelmed with secondaries and details and collecting letters and all the steps that are required for that part. And you're not going to have time. You might tell yourself, oh, I'll do it later. But this spring, before the application even opens, go visit the schools in your state at least. And other schools if you're interested, but you're most likely to get accepted to the schools in your state where you're considered a resident. So make it a priority this spring before the application opens to go visit the medical schools in your state. If you live an hour or two away from a school and you don't visit, it's going to seem really strange, especially in your secondaries, when you don't have direct experience to write about. So give yourself help by going to visit those schools ahead of time, and all the schools in your state if you can, or at least the ones that are closest to you. Because when it comes to sitting down and writing those secondaries, you're going to be so happy you did, because you'll have so much more to say if you've actually been to the school. Researching schools that specialize in your research interests or fields of interest can be helpful. As long as you fit within their GPA or MCAT range, it can be helpful to look at schools that share research interests or special areas of interest that only that school offers. So do your research, take your time, and see if there are any schools like that. Or if any of your PIs or your research colleagues have connections to medical schools, that can also be very helpful, especially in giving recommendations by word of mouth or checking up on your application. They can often put a good word in for you. So it's always a good idea to look and see what special connections might you have to schools that could give you a leg up. Are there any questions so far?
Yes, there are several. So let's take a look at some of these questions. Okay, Parth asks a very interesting question, and that is, why are the visits important? Why is it important to visit schools? And do they have like prospective student events?
Yeah, so it's important to visit because when you write secondaries, one question that you often get is, why do you want to go to our school? Why our school? And if you don't have firsthand knowledge, it can be difficult to answer that question. You'll be left to using their website for information. And often, some of these schools' websites are so outdated and they don't really have that much information about what makes their school unique. So I know I've had a lot of students year after year kicking themselves for not taking that advice because they get stuck on that question, because there's a lot of stuff that's not included on the website about the campuses or the culture or what they offer. And some schools are worse than others in terms of sharing information. So you will be so pleased with yourself if you take the time to do that before the application even opens.
Okay, great. Now here's another question. This is from Jerry. I have heard that some schools don't start looking at applications until early fall. Is this true?
It depends. There are some schools this year who are saying they're going to look at all applications before they send out invites. Have you heard that as well, Linda?
I actually have not. I haven't.
Yeah,
I'm still hearing get it in as soon as you can.
Yeah, that's safest. That's the safest policy. But there are some deans going around saying that they're going to wait to review all the applications before sending out interview invites or making decisions about acceptances. And it's hard to tell if it's just the deans talking or what the process, if the process has actually changed. So I'll have more information about that, at the end of this cycle. But I have heard that some schools are holding back to look at all applications before they make decisions.
Okay. Let's see. Barbara's asking, is taking the MCAT multiple times a good or bad thing?
So there's new rules. As of 2015, the AAMC has made it a rule that you can only take the MCAT 7 times in one lifetime. And you can't take it more than 4 times in a 2-year period. So there is a limit on the number of times you can actually take it. But the good news, and in my experience, as long as you improve each time you take the MCAT, it's not going to be held against you. So as long as there's even 1 point improvement, it will not hurt if you take the MCAT multiple times. And I think one of my favorite students, he was an amazing mentor and a wonderful medical student, he took the MCAT, if I recall, I think about 6 times, and he did about 4 or 5 different post-bac programs. And this guy was such a character because he had the best sense of humor and the best attitude, because he had to work so hard to get accepted. And he was the most popular mentor because he could always, find that perfect thing to say to keep people encouraged, because he'd really been through it. Obviously, that's not ideal, right? But having a decreasing trend in your scores can really hurt your application. You don't want to be in that position.
Okay, so I guess it depends more up to the maximum. It depends more what your scores are doing than how many times you took it, right?
Yep, exactly. It's more about the trend in the scores than about how many times you've taken it.
Okay. Katie asks, aside from the school's website, is there another way to gain that specific information about the schools without actually visiting?
Yeah, that's such a tough one.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because another benefit that occurred to me about visiting is that you can make great connections. You can get to know their admissions office staff. They can get to know you by name. And, some students who are charismatic and really friendly, you get to know them as they check in during the applications process, and it kind of helps you not lose track of their application. So it's nice to have put a name to a face. If you can't visit, which is the absolute best possible thing to do if you can, the next best thing would be, joining the social media for the school, so that you get updates and articles about publications or discoveries. It would be becoming friends, if possible, with any current students or former students. Look around at your network. Are there any doctors or other health professionals that you work with that have special ties to these schools or programs? And you could ask them about their experience about the school. Be careful, though, that information might be dated. But it really, if at all possible, it really is best to visit the school, especially the ones closest to you.
Okay. Let's take one more question, and then we'll go back to the presentation and take more questions later, okay? Morgan asks, if you've already applied before, what can we use from previous applications and what do we need to change? For example, if I really like my personal statement from a previous application, can I keep it the same, change it some, or completely scrap it? And should I do the same for the experiences?
Oh, I'm so sad I don't have a better response for you. Is it Michael?
It's Morgan.
Morgan, sorry, Morgan. I'm sad to say that you'll have to scrap it, the personal statement, because it's usually one click for the schools. If you've applied to them before, it's one click for the school to pull up your previous application. And you want to demonstrate, if you're a reapplicant, that you've changed as much as humanly possible, that you've improved in every area possible. And so that will include, right, having a new personal statement that demonstrates or that reflects your new activities, new updates, but also that demonstrates your growth and maturity over that year. So it would actually hurt you to use the same personal statement, because it won't show growth. So I would say, I'm happy for students who are reapplicants. The first thing that I do for them is we go through their previous application together, and I go through it just like I did when I was working in admissions and helping students improve. I will go through and look at each part of the application, starting with the date that it was submitted, and make a list of, okay, what was done well here and what needs to be improved, what could be changed, what were the weaknesses, but also the strengths of the application. So that's something, if you wanted to do a review, we offer a package in which we can, sit down and go through your application together. So the next section we're going to talk about are the letters of recommendation. So why is this part of the application so stressful? It takes time and patience. It's out of your control. A lot of people say it totally stresses them out because it's out of their control, right? You don't get to see the letters. You don't have any control over when they're submitted. You just have to wait patiently. It's most important for you to know that they are due with the secondary applications. So the letters of rec are not due with the primary. The letters are due with the secondary applications. So each school that sends you a secondary will send you a deadline for the secondary. That is when the letters are due. So that can, put a lot of people to rest. So you can begin requesting them early. Before or during the time you plan to submit your primary application is safest. So I highly recommend you plan to have them by the time you will submit the primary, because the secondaries can begin coming in almost immediately. So the way to successfully approach the process of requesting letters of rec, so how to ask, are to only ask professors from whom you've received A's, because they're going to have to rank you in those letters and talk about the grade that you received in their class. Only ask the people who know you the best, and this is a wonderful reason to attend weekly office hours. And always have backup letters. Never rely on one person alone. So one year we had our beloved endocrinology professor who wrote letters for all of our students every year. His wife became very sick one summer, and he suddenly wasn't able to write letters of rec for our students. And for those students who only planned on having one person to write the letter, and it was only one student, thankfully, that one student didn't get into medical school that year because he didn't have a backup letter. So everybody else took the advice and had multiple backup people to write letters. So never rely on one person for a letter of recommendation. And the combination that I recommend are 2 to 3 science professor letters, 1 to 2 community service letters, 1 to 2 clinical experience letters, 1 leadership letter, and 1 research letter, if applicable, or from an employer or non-science professor. So I'm going to read that again. So the combination that I recommend that has seemed to be the most successful in my experience is 2 to 3 science professor letters, 1 to 2 community service letters, 1 to 2 clinical experience letters, 1 leadership letter, and 1 research letter if applicable, or from an employer or non-science professor of your choice. So most medical schools don't require research experience, but there are a handful of schools that do require research, and that's like UC San Diego, Stanford. They won't accept students who don't have at least 2 years of research experience. So keep in mind, research is not required at most medical schools. So for those of you listening, whom will you ask for letters of rec?
If you want to put that in the question window, we're going to use it for your answers at the moment. Physicians, advisors, professor who I worked with for my honors thesis, professors, physician mentors, research mentors, biology professors, my science professor and my volunteer mentor, advisors. We also have a couple of questions from people who've been out of school for a couple of years and are wondering how can they ask for recommendations. Community service.
Yeah, so if you've been out of school for a while, I would want to know how long you've been out of school. Most med schools prefer coursework that was completed, within the last 5 years. So if you've been out of school for 5 years or more, it might be a good idea for you to take some new coursework, and then that would give you a way to be able to ask current instructors or professors for letters. So if you've been out of school for more than 5 years, taking new coursework would be the best way to approach it, in my opinion. So for each letter writer, so the best way to ask, so getting into the how-to, is to give each letter writer a deadline and a letter packet that includes a final draft of your personal statement, an updated copy of your resume or CV, a cover letter for the letter of rec, because the WMC, they print a cover letter that has a barcode that links it to your account. So you need to make sure that if you're using Interfolio or the WMC letter service, right, that you've got the cover letter with your barcode to give to your letter writers. And then any other necessary materials, maybe things like your transcript if you're extremely proud of your grades and your GPA trends, or any other materials that would be helpful or specific to that letter writer. If, for example, if you were able to publish a paper, perhaps a copy of that paper, things like that would be useful. Whenever possible, it's best to ask for letters of rec in person. It's very easy to say no to someone through email. It's harder to say no over the phone, and it's much, much harder in person when you're looking someone in the eye. But to make sure that you're getting strong letters of rec, it can help to say, look them in the eye and say, could you please provide a strong, can you provide a strong letter of recommendation? And if they hesitate or they can't do that, they are doing you a favor and you probably don't want that letter. So make sure, right, that you ask people who know you and who right, will write strong, positive letters, because those letters of rec can hold applications back if they're not good. All right, so moving on. So we're going to talk about secondary applications. So secondaries can arrive immediately after you submit the primary application, or they can take weeks to arrive, depending on whether the schools send out automatic secondaries or pre-screen before sending them out. So the secondaries that you receive immediately are often automatic. And then those that are sent out weeks later are pre-screened, right? It requires a lot of people to go through all those AMCAS applications and decide who to send secondaries to. So often you can tell what type of secondary it is by when you receive it. Often, students are overwhelmed by the number of secondaries they receive, right, year after year. And the students who don't treat the secondaries like it's another, like it's another job or another activity can find themselves in trouble, right, if they don't plan to devote the time to them. So make sure that you plan to give yourself the time to do an excellent job on your secondaries, because those can lead to interviews. Each secondary can contain anywhere from one long essay, and I think UC San Diego usually takes the cake for longest essay. Their essay is usually 10,000 characters. It's usually just one long essay. Nice, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or, right, you can see something like 12 short essays, and a good example of that is like USC, where they have, cutesy questions like, if you could pick a nickname, what would your nickname be? Right? And it's 12 short essays. So there's a lot of diversity in the number of essays, but also the length. Examples of the most common unsuccessful strategies that I can share with you would be things like, and I love the fallen ice cream cone on the screen, is saving all of them to do them all together. Not a good idea when you've got like 35 or more. And I know you will never forget, Linda, because I will never forget that student who sent me an email with 35 secondaries.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
I will never forget that. Yeah. So she had cut and pasted the same essay over and over like 35 times, and it didn't even match the prompts. And I don't know, she must have thought, like, I don't know what she thought, but there's no way, right, that I can make an essay that doesn't answer the question. No. Yeah. So don't save them to do them all together. It's too much. It's overwhelming.
The secondaries are all about fit. So if they all sound the same, you're not doing it.
Yeah. And when you don't change the name of the school, that's an automatic rejection, and that happens all the time. Waiting longer than 2 weeks to submit them that I can't emphasize enough that you really, 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 really need to get them in within 2 weeks. The students I've noticed this year, the students who really took that to heart and they got the secondaries in within a week were getting interviews sooner than anybody. It was really interesting. And those students who were signed up for too much, didn't plan for the time needed to do secondaries, those students who were getting them a month or months later submitted, those are the students not getting interviews by this point. And it's sad, it's horrible, because they're still doing all their volunteer work and still involved with all their family stuff and work, and they did not plan the time needed to do secondary. So make sure, and I'm emphasizing that because you want to set yourself up for success and give yourself enough time to do the secondaries. Submitting rough drafts without editing, just don't do it. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to hurt you more than it will help. And having another person, someone like me or my colleagues, working with a professional editor, consultant, mentor, we're here to make sure that you do your best work. And it can be such a fun process. I absolutely love working on secondary essays with my clients. This morning I was working with someone, and you get to learn so much about yourself, right? It's a lot of me asking questions and encouraging students to think deeper and to think about things maybe they've never thought about before, and doing some soul searching and self-reflection. So it can be such a fun process. So give yourself the time to do it well. Another common mistake is not prioritizing them by deadline or order of importance. And that is so frustrating, because you are most likely to get accepted to the medical schools in which you are a resident of the state. So for example, if you didn't make sure that you met the 2-week mark for those schools, you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. So prioritize them. Look at, as soon as you get the secondary, make sure you've created an Excel spreadsheet and you're tracking all the schools you've applied to, the date you submitted the secondary, especially if there are different dates, if you've added schools later, dates you received the secondaries, dates you returned the secondaries, date of your interview, right? Hopefully there's lots of those. So having an Excel spreadsheet like that can give you an overview. It can give you the big picture perspective so you don't get lost in the details of one particularly difficult secondary and then miss deadlines. Another common mistake is cutting and pasting without changing the name of the school, as I mentioned. I had somebody do that this year, doing too many secondaries all at once, and unfortunately she got rejected from the school, that she submitted the wrong name of the school. And pretty quickly too. I was kind of impressed by how quickly. So you don't want to find yourself in that position. Not having letters of rec to submit by the deadline or the right combination of letters, that can be so incredibly stressful if you're waiting for that one last letter. Each school will ask for a different combination of letters. So you want to make sure you use that formula that I shared so that you've got enough of each different type of letter that when you get a request from a school, you're able to put that combination together very quickly and submit it with the secondary. It's an extremely time-consuming task to do secondaries. I get a sense that I think people underestimate it every year. Is that your experience, Linda?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think that I sometimes feel like applicants are drowning in secondaries when they get that deluge, when they start, they start coming out. They come in a wave, more like tsunami, depending upon the number of schools people apply to. And yeah, there will be a few stragglers coming later, but the automatic ones do come in a wave.
Yeah, I feel like if that's something, if someone can take that away from this webinar, we've done a fantastic job. But people underestimate how much time it will take. And When you get 7 in one day and then 10 the next day, and you're by the end of the week, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got 20 secondaries, right? It's so overwhelming. So
do you recommend
often,
some pre-writing for that?
yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. You know exactly what. The
Planned.
most successful students I ever work with are the ones who start early. So the ones who work with me to pre-outline. So using the secondary questions from the previous year, and we have them posted on our website. We have blog tip posts for many of the schools with their secondary questions. It just makes sense. You will make your life so much easier because the schools don't change the questions much from year to year. If they change them, sometimes they'll add one question or they'll delete a question, but I've never seen it. I've never seen a school change every question on their secondary from year to year. So the students who start early and pre-outline, pre-write, who get the secondaries written, sometimes even before their primary is submitted, those are the students who are most likely to get an acceptance because they've got a significant number, enough done that they're not going to be overwhelmed by the number that they get. So pre-outlining, pre-writing, set yourself up for success, plan to spend a lot of time on secondary applications.
Now, do you recommend that even though they have a certain inventory, if you will, of pre-written essays, that they customize the essays to the school and to the prompts when they actually get the secondary in their hands?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think it's almost like a pet peeve for me is when somebody says, oh, I think I'll write a diversity essay that I can use for all the diversity essays for all the schools. However, I mean, like, that sounds, in theory, that sounds great, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that each school asks it in a slightly different way. And often they'll combine the questions like why our school with what you would contribute to our school. So they'll say, you know, based on our mission, which is blah, 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 like, what would you contribute to our diversity in these areas, you know, characteristics, experiences, etc. And so you'll get these specific questions, and if you've written a generic diversity essay, obviously it's not going to cut it. You're either not going to answer part of the question, or it's not going to be specific to that school if you're asking about what you're going to bring them specifically. So I'd recommend you be very careful and not try to write generic essays that'll fit all the schools, because that's very hard to do. Eventually, you know, once you've written enough secondaries, you will be able to recycle them, but you'll have to do it very skillfully, meaning that you use the sections that are relevant, but that you update or craft the essay to their school. And that's why, again, working with someone like me, I can very quickly, easily see, okay, you know, you've answered part of the question here, but how will you answer this part or do it more effectively than you have? So just give yourself enough time to write these essays, because they are specific enough that you can't really get away with using a one-size-fits-all essay for the same type of question.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so moving on then. Yeah. Okay, so again, it is often helpful to work with a professional editor or receive feedback on your work before submitting it. Just please make sure somebody else looks at it, because they'll see things that maybe you won't, especially if you're doing it at the last minute. After you complete the first batch of secondaries, you know, many of the questions become repetitive and you can adapt and recycle, as I mentioned. Again, I want to emphasize, this does not mean copy and pasting. It means changing the essay enough to meet the prompt and the specific school. And the schools are different enough, you know, that you have to pay attention to the nuances and mission and goals and awards that the school has won, you know, and anything else about the school that you know. And the more you know about them, the more you're going to be able to write meaningful essays. So it's also important in the secondaries to include any new activities, awards, or accomplishments that are not included in the primary. So are there any questions for those of you listening that you have about secondaries?
Is there a limit to the number of secondary applications that you can return or that you can submit? This is from Ashley.
Are there limits to the number of secondaries you can submit or return?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, there's no limits. You can get secondaries, from, I've never seen it happen where somebody gets a secondary from every single school they apply. Usually you won't hear back from one or two for whatever reason. But yeah, there's no limit on the number of secondaries you can return.
Okay,
Yeah.
Let's see what else we have here. Is prospective doctor a reliable source of pre-writing secondary essays?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I do think so.
And
Yeah.
I will also look at where we have our prompts. Actually, let me get it for you folks now. And
I do. When I'm writing secondary tip posts, I use that website, or I use it to cross-reference to make sure they're all adding up and that they all look the same. But yeah, I do think that's a reliable site.
All right. So Sarah has a very interesting question. Which activities should we keep for the primary, and which ones should we mention on the secondaries? It's a good question.
Strategy.
Yes.
Yeah. That's all going to depend on your specific background, strengths, and weaknesses. So depending on your story, your background, your grades, your MCAT, that's going to depend on you and the specifics of your story. So I don't have enough information to answer that question. I would need to go through your application materials with you and come up with a strategy. It's all about how you market yourself, what you need to address in the primary versus what kind of questions you can expect to get in the secondary and that you don't need to answer in the primary. And that will depend on, if you have anything you need to explain in your grades, or what your strengths are in terms of activities, what you would highlight. And that's what makes my job so much fun, and getting to know my clients, is every person is so unique and so different. And I've heard some incredible stories. This is my 14th year doing this, and I'm always, every year, surprised and inspired by students. So to answer that question, I would need to know more about you.
Right. Just from my perspective, and I've been an admissions consultant for over 20 years, I would say you want to put in your primary application the most impressive experiences you can. It's not a matter of saving stuff for your secondaries, because you want to make sure you get a secondary. And then the secondary, that the primary, in very broad strokes, is what's going to make you a wonderful physician and why you want to become a physician. The secondary is more about why this school, and it should supplement what you've put in the primary. And again, but also with a focus on showing fit while you answer the specific questions. Is that a fair guideline, Alicia?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Okay, all right. So I think we should move on.
So moving on. Next, we're going to talk about interviews. If you have successfully completed all other parts of the application, you will be invited to interview. So anywhere from 4 weeks after submitting your secondary to 8 weeks. Often it takes a month or two. It's rare that students hear back within 4 weeks, but I have heard of it happening. It has happened. But it can take many months. Sometimes I've had students called at the very last moment, which is considered March. March would be when most med schools stop their interview process. But it can happen here at the last minute for an interview. There's 2 different kinds of interviews now. I'm sure you guys have heard. There's the traditional interview, and there's now the MMI multiple mini interviews. So this is different stations and So the traditional interview would be defined as one-on-one 30-minute interview. It could be one interviewer, one student being interviewed. It could be two interviewers, two students. It could be a panel 3-on-3, but it's typically 30 to 60 minutes maximum. The MMI, the multiple mini interview, is a method that's come out of Canada, McMaster University, and what they do is they set up stations. So there could be anywhere from 8 to 10 stations, and they have you participate in practical scenarios, things like collaborative activities where you build something or draw something, giving each other directions. Often a student will give directions at one point, and then that same student will do the station as the one taking the direction and making the drawing or building the object. And you can use building blocks. I think Michigan State was using spaghetti and marshmallows for a long time. So it's a variety of materials. The other types of stations are traditional questions, why medicine, what have you done to reach your goal, those sort of traditional questions. And then you can also get actor scenarios where you've got someone expressing strong emotion and you have to create a successful resolution to the situation to show how well you handle pressure. And then the fourth type of situation are debate style or ethical questions. So some schools are no longer doing the debates, like UC Davis is no longer using the debate style, and more schools are doing ethical scenarios where they give you a situation and you have to talk through what you would do or what you would recommend a person do in that situation. So you can definitely expect to see 70% of interviews in the US are traditional interviews, and about 30% are MMIs. And we're now seeing combinations. Schools are kind of using a combination of both, where you get like a one-on-one 30-minute interview, but then you also participate in maybe 5 stations that are set up like an MMI. So we're seeing schools that are kind of transitioning from traditional to MMI and using combinations. There's even one school that's using real patients, and students are meeting and interacting with the patients, and the patients are actually giving the students scores. So there's quite a variety of methods that schools are using. It's essential to prepare for interviews with mocks, especially for either type. Really, the only way to prepare for an interview is to practice interviewing. Arrive early, scope things out, dress professionally, right? Make sure you test out your outfit so that there's no button problems, or if the zipper's uncomfortable or something, make sure that you give it a test run, a test drive, and try it out. Wear it for the day before or the week before to make sure, give yourself enough time if you need to take it to the tailor or have something altered that you have time to do it. Especially, new shoes, break in the new shoes. Bring an updated copy of your CV or resume if you can to the interviews. Often, especially for traditional interviews, some interviewers will use the CV or resume to guide the conversation. So highlighting or putting all the new things in bold that weren't in your primary can be a great topic of conversation to update them on what you've been doing. And you can expect to hear back from the schools after the interview anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 weeks or longer, depending on their admissions process. And I had a student a few years ago who got called by the Dean of Admissions like 2 days after the interview. He did such a fantastic job. And I think we did like 6 or 7 mocks. We did a lot of mocks, but he killed his interview. He did amazing. And he got called literally 2 days after to be accepted by the dean. That's probably the most fantastic story I have of someone performing well in an interview. That doesn't often happen, but when it does happen, you've done an exceptional job. In some schools, they're saying that there are more schools this year saying that they're going to wait to give acceptance until they've reviewed most of the applicants. So it may take longer this cycle, we'll see, than in the past. It'll be interesting to pay attention to. So the timeline. Applying early is critical, right? Covering all parts of the application, anticipating each part before it happens, perhaps doing pre-writing, getting things done ahead of schedule. Errors with the AAMC application 4 cycles ago had a ripple effect on applicants and had a major impact. So those students who applied after the glitch in the computers because they received a record number of applications and their system crashed, their applications were put behind by months. Like they received secondaries months later than usual. They received interview invites months later than usual. It was a big mess. So apply early, right? Make sure that you are ahead of the curve. So medical schools can run out of spots. As I mentioned at the beginning, the medical school admissions process is done on a rolling admissions basis. So they can run out of spots for interviews and acceptances. So if you apply very late, if you apply as late as September, October, November, some schools may have already accepted the maximum number of students they interview, and they may not even look at your application. So when you apply late, you really run the risk of schools running out of spots. After you submit your primary, you can begin receiving secondary applications immediately, but you will receive most within 4 to 6 weeks. After submitting your secondary applications, you can hear back for an interview anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks or longer. And after the interview, you may hear back within 2 weeks to 8 weeks or longer. And I've had students, I'll never forget the student, and I'm friends with her on Facebook. She's hysterical. She recently shaved her head for, I think it was a St. Baldrick's cancer fundraiser. And she's just amazing. She was literally, when I got a call from her one day, she was sobbing. And I thought she was calling to tell me that she was rejected. And I just felt devastated because I had absolutely loved working with her. She was brilliant, had such a great sense of humor. And for her to call crying, I thought, oh man, this is bad. And she was calling, crying with tears of joy because she then called off the waiting list and accepted at the very last minute, like a week or two before classes began. And she was so happy. She was just sobbing. But that was a very cool phone call. But it can happen. You can get called at the very last minute off of the waiting list. It does happen. So how many people found this presentation useful? If you could give me a show of hands.
Okay, the hands are going up.
I'm going to thank
well
all
over
of you.
50%.
Yay! Well, thank you all for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. And I'll take more questions in a moment.
Okay, great. Alicia, thank you so much for this very informative webinar. I'm sure that you've really added to the participants' insights about the entire medical school application process, as their reaction indicates. We'll take additional questions, as Alicia said, in just a minute, but now I'd like to take a minute or two to share a few thoughts about the arduous process that Alicia just outlined. It's called the medical school application process. It's plain old hard to get accepted to medical school. The competition, even for people who have a competitive GPA MCAT and who volunteered and done research, it's intense. Top medical schools have acceptance rates of under 10%, and not all of you, frankly, have great stats and experience. This is a long, complex process, and it's different from the one that you went through when you applied to college. Frankly, it's different from anything you've done before, unless you're a reapplicant, in which case something didn't work last time. Now, Alicia has given you an outstanding overview of the process, but you still need to apply her advice to your specific situation. We'd love to help you do so on an individual basis. We here at Accepted have been helping medical school applicants navigate this process successfully for over 20 years. Our clients are applicants just like you, but they access the experience of former admissions committee members and directors, former postbac program directors, and exceptionally experienced consultants to guide them along the path to medical school acceptance. You can have that guidance too. You can have a mentor to assess your school choices, advise you, and edit your personal statement, your activity descriptions, your most meaningful experiences, and of course the secondaries, and provide IV preparation. And I mentioned at the very beginning that we have a special now, save $250 on any primary application package. We have some different primary application packages. We have the primary alone, we have primary plus secondary, we have TMDSAS. We have options there. You can save $250 on any of them through December 19th. Here's what I'd like you to do after the Q&A. Visit www.accepted.com/primary. Choose the service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need for that missing how that I mentioned how to apply Alicia's advice to your specific situation, and go from, I don't know if you're quite as confused. I'm sure you're not as confused as you were when you started this webinar, but go from wherever you're at now to clarity, from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't accepted expensive? Well, frankly, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection may not be quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher than our fees. So let's take a look. The cost of reapplication, especially if you have to retake the MCAT, could be a few $1,000s. You would have, if you have to reapply, you'd be talking about additional year of reduced pre-physician earnings. There's also the potential that you could have gotten into a better program with higher lifetime earnings if you work with an accepted consultant, and as opposed to a minimum investment of $315 or our basic primary application package of $25.25. And again, on the latter, you folks could save $250. So every year we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected to work with us now. I just got an email last night from a mother whose daughter has not been invited to any interviews. And we talked about what she can and frankly can't do at this point to help her application chances. And she said, I wish I would have found you guys at the beginning of the process, and she would have worked with you to begin with. She would have been better off was contacting us initially, and so would you. Our CMO went to a lunch not long ago, a social event having nothing to do with her work for Accepted. And there was a physician assistant there, and he said, you know what, the host asked the CMO about her work, and Rachel told everybody what she does, what she's doing it for, and one of the guests said, I worked with you guys, I worked with your company, it was a fantastic investment for me, because I got to start my PA salary a whole year earlier than I would have had I applied on my own. But enough from me. What do Accepted's clients say? Well, these testimonials are for Alicia. Just to highlight, I am a med student. I was offered 4 interviews total and was accepted to 2 schools. I chose to attend UCF College of Medicine in Orlando. I'm eternally grateful to you and all the critical advice and help you gave. I could not have made it through the application process without your help. Or the second one, my experience working with Alicia was amazing. She was knowledgeable and guided me through all steps of this process. The turnaround time for editing my secondaries was very short and allowed me to really push ahead in having my applications out earlier. Alicia's input from my essays was invaluable. The interview prep was important because it opened my eyes to the types of questions that could be asked and really prepared me to respond to those questions. I would highly recommend using Alicia for the application process. Alicia is wonderful, but she does book up. So I'm going to also give you some examples of feedback on some of our other consultants. Dr. Gordon was wonderful to talk to. He pointed out the weak points in my application and kindly explained the best way to present them in my application, which was my biggest concern. Or Jessica really helped me with writing my personal statement. With her help, I was able to better prepare myself for my secondary applications and later interviews. Now I will be starting medical school in the fall. Or Dr. Newman, this is absolutely impressive. I cannot be happier today. The tone of my text sounds personal, professional, consequential, and so true. Your work is spectacular. Thank you so much for adding that excitement that I felt but could not convey. Again, we'd love to help you as we've helped these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and thousands of other clients over the last 20 years. So once again, this is what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's webinar. Visit accept.com/primary, choose the service that's right for you, get the guidance that you need, and then apply confidently and efficiently. Get accepted. Now that we've, let's move on to the Q&A, because I know there are still several questions, excellent questions here. Okay. Does the personal statement need to be different for MD schools and DO schools? Srinivas asked that.
It depends, yeah. So if you have more to say about why DO, right, then that essay will be different. Many students are able to use the personal statement that we outline and I've edited for AMCAS as well as ACOMAS. So it is definitely possible to use the AMCAS for that, the DO one. But if you do have anything that really separates you out in terms of why DO, if you have compelling experience or if you have more to say, I would recommend that you develop the essay out more towards why DO. It would look better for DO schools to be able to do that.
Okay. Ari asks, how does taking a gap year and not doing medical science related things look to medical school? Good question.
Yeah, it depends on what you do. So if you are, you know, in Nicaragua volunteering or you're doing Peace Corps, it depends on how you use that time. I don't recommend, you know, like not doing any volunteer work or not doing anything clinically related that could hurt you. But medical schools do love teachers. If you do like Teach for America, they love that. I mean, the Latin word for doctor, you know, the Latin root for doctor actually means teacher. So they love that. Other health professionals, like, you know, nurses, people who have different types of experience or play different roles in the healthcare team, phlebotomists, medical assistants, you know, they love to see that kind of work. So having a gap year can really enhance your application if you're strategic about how you use that time.
Okay, here's a question from Sai. Would it be accurate to say that if you've gotten an interview, you have a good chance of getting into a particular medical school?
Yeah, definitely, because if you look at the number of students they interview versus the number of students they send secondaries, it's a much more select group for interviews. So, and some schools will tell you, you know, if you receive an interview, you're this % more likely, you know, to receive an acceptance than other applicants. So yes, it's definitely a wonderful sign because it takes so much work to interview. There's so many people involved in the process, especially if it's an MMI. So it's a great honor to get an interview. It really means the school is excited and invested in you. Yeah, it's a wonderful, exciting sign.
Agreed. Okay, Morgan asks, if we were to use the package, when should we purchase it if we are applying in 2019? If you are planning to apply summer of 2019, I would recommend, and assuming that you take the MCAT prior to this point, I would recommend that you contact us in December of 2018. It's a great time to start the process, gives you plenty of time to work on the personal statement and everything else. So if you're planning to apply in summer 2018 and you already have your MCAT score, I would encourage you to contact us as soon as possible and get started. Again, you can start later. There's no penalty in terms of extra fees, but you don't want to be rushing. If you contact us in May and you're feeling, oh, I want to get this in June, I got to get it, I got to do it, then already there's pressure. So it's a great time if you want to contact us now. Also, some of you are still in school and you can actually use the holidays, the holiday break to get started when you're not working full-time or going to school full-time. So thank you for that question. Let's see what else we have. When examining whether or not your GPA fits in a school's range, will the medical schools consider your major or which undergraduate college you went to?
Yeah, so more and more medical schools are changing their pre-med requirements that they're looking to diversify the majors of the students they accept and the backgrounds of their students. So yeah, it can help to have diverse interests. And if not in the major, if you're a typical bio major, make sure you minor, a minor in Spanish or, minor in public health, or that could really go a long way. But yes, medical schools, because some schools are now, some schools no longer have required pre-med classes, they're having recommended coursework, and they're really relying on the MCATs to demonstrate students' proficiency. So, and make sure you're double checking the requirements of the schools that you're interested in, because in recent years, they've been changing quite a lot. Have you noticed that, Linda?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So Michael asks, similar to the question about resubmitting personal statements on a second application, should you use the same references and recommendations for your letters of recommendation if you're reapplying?
I'm so glad you asked this question.
Yay, Michael.
Yeah, it will hurt you if you apply with the same letters, meaning the same dates on the letters. It may seem strange, but some selection committees actually get angry when they see letters of rec that are a year or older. So to avoid insulting the sensibilities of your selection committee, right? Because they are delicate, make sure your letters are dated the year that you're applying and that they are as recent as possible. It will actually, that could be a reason. That by itself, as crazy as it sounds. And I remember being in a meeting and just arguing so hard for somebody, but the letters were old, and that reason by itself led to some students getting rejected, as painful as that is.
Okay, there's another question. Wait a minute here, just moved. If there's no interview invitation after a long time, can you send another letter of intent to get an interview? What do you advise people to do if they haven't heard? They've sent in their secondary, and let's say it's December or January, they sent in their secondary in August, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Does it make sense to do anything? Or do they just have
to? December, I would say December is like the halfway point in the interview process. Would you agree with that, Linda?
Yeah.
I would say December is the time to sweat a little bit if you haven't heard. Well, depending on when you submitted your application. If you submitted your application early, June, July, and you haven't heard by December, I think it's appropriate to start to sweat, because you're in the halfway point of the interview process. And the chances, of you getting an interview are getting smaller. So at that time, and I say big if you have an update that's appropriate to send, I would say, yeah, send, like a letter of interest that also doubles as an update letter. But just to be realistic, a letter of interest or an update letter isn't going to make or break whether you get an interview. So I always tell students to be realistic. If there's a major weakness or flaw in your application that you did not address, that could be holding your application back. So unless you have an update, like an award, a publication, an acceptance to another school, that would be appropriate to update the other schools about. Because if one school if one school accepts you and shows confidence, if you let the other schools know that, they might also kind of start jumping. It might give them the motivation to make sure they give you an interview invite, because they'll be nervous. They're going to miss out on somebody really great. So those are the types of updates that would be appropriate to send. You could send a letter of interest without updates if you don't have anything new to say, but it's not strong. Again, it's not going to make that big of a difference. What's your opinion, Linda?
I would, if you don't have anything to say, you're basically not showing any growth or impact. Since you applied, it's not going to be that powerful. I don't think it had much impact. If something material happened, if you got published, you took a leadership role in some community service activity, you undertook a new fascinating clinical role, that would be worth updating them about, and also then you could reaffirm your interest in the program.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that you shouldn't expect too much to happen from an update letter. So be realistic about your expectations. But that being said, all of you are so fantastic for starting early, for participating in this webinar and thinking ahead. You all have put yourself ahead, of the average applicant who doesn't know what's going on. I mean, I had a student this cycle who dropped out. Well, he was going to apply. He had everything ready to go. And I think he attended a webinar, actually, the secondaries webinar, Linda.
Oh, yeah.
And he had no idea how much time and effort that the secondaries required. And he decided, he'd recently had an illness, and he decided he would wait and apply and do all the stuff ahead of time and apply early next cycle. And I was really proud of him for realizing that he was putting himself in a really bad position. And he didn't have the time. He was working full time and had a lot of other stuff going on. So he realized he couldn't do it this cycle. And now, he's starting, we're starting in January on his application, and he's setting himself up for success. So all of you for participating today are putting yourself in the best possible position. So kudos to all of you.
Okay, great. I think with that note, we're gonna end. Again, you can save $250 on any primary application package. You can get the kind of individual guidance that will help you optimize your application and provide you with the access to experience, expertise, and objectivity, which is sometimes sorely missing when you're looking at your own writing. That can really make a difference when you apply to medical school. So with that, once again, thank you very much to Alicia. Thank you very much to participants. Please fill out your questionnaire when you get it and take advantage of the coupon code. Ends December 19th. Best wishes for a happy holiday and new year and great application cycle. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.